Another big factor of the fallout from Sunday's announcement is the issue of race. Of course, the VP could become the first black woman elected to the Oval Office, but many Republican lawmakers have dismissed her as a, quote, DEI candidate. But others say there are more important issues about her record that should be taking center stage. One of them is my guest tonight. Isaac Willhour is a contributor for Young Voices. He is up late with me tonight here on the Final Five to talk about that and more. Isaac, thanks for joining me. Good to see you tonight.
Hey, Jim, thanks for having me.
You know, what's interesting is Kamala Harris, as a presidential candidate in 2020, was one of the first to flame out. There wasn't a lot of enthusiasm around her candidacy, but she was chosen by Vice President Biden to be his running mate. I'm losing track of my presidents here. But as we look at the vice president right now as things stand, her role in this race.
Yeah, it's an interesting question here. So we're going to talk about DEI. We'll get into that over the course of things. But let's think about seriously. Let's think about the term DEI hire, right? I want to zero in on that. People like Nikki Haley have said this is not helpful. Other Republican lawmakers have just kind of gone all in on calling Kamala Harris a DEI hire. Let's talk about what that actually means. Every sane person knows that the term DEI hire is not a stand-in for they're black, therefore their opinion is to be dismissed. That's not what that means. That's not what any serious, sane, rational DEI critic means. What they mean is this. When you call someone a DEI hire, you are saying that they benefited from a system that prioritizes racial characteristics, and that the current position they enjoy is in some way linked to their use of that racial hierarchy. That doesn't mean that every single black person is a DEI hire. That's clearly not what that means. That's not what any rational, sane, ethical person would say. But to call Kamala Harris a DEI hire is not simply a critique of her race. It's a critique of the way in which the Democratic Party has used her race, and has used her race as a bludgeon and as a cudgel to dismiss the criticisms that have come from her from the Trump campaign and elsewhere. That's clear. The DEI hire term, it is not a racist term. It is simply an acknowledgement or an assertion that that a candidate has benefited from a certain power structure in which race matters. Okay. And in looking at the record of Kamala Harris, it is very, very obvious that that is the case.
So jumping in on that, because obviously DEI means diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that can mean a lot of different characteristics. And many people have pointed back to saying, okay, well, if you're looking at equity and involving women, President Reagan had vowed back in the 80s, before he was elected, to appoint the first woman to the Supreme Court. Is there a fundamental difference between things that Ronald Reagan said or Donald Trump saying that he wanted to make sure he appointed a woman to the Supreme Court and Amy Coney Barrett? Are there parallels between the criticisms we're hearing right now and those promises made in the past?
I mean, quite possibly. So if you're an advocate of meritocracy, you believe that the most qualified person should get the job. And therefore, if that calculus that you're doing to arrive at that decision is prejudiced by ideas of race and gender and like a certain endpoint of what you want that to look like, then yes, your decision is probably going to exclude some people that would otherwise be qualified for that job. Is it the same thing for Ronald Reagan to say that as Joe Biden? I don't know. I wasn't alive when Ronald Reagan said that, but I am alive when Joe Biden said this. And there is no question that this has created a situation that the Democratic Party is now having to reckon with in a very real way, because the VP slot is not the quarterback position. This is very obvious. She had to, Joe Biden, see, now we're both mixing up our pronouns. This is great. We could riff on that for 15 minutes, but let's not.
No.
Joe Biden picked somebody, and again, it wasn't just Joe Biden, right? Like you can look at a ton of information in the run up to the election. People were saying that Joe Biden should pick a black woman. You can look at people like James Clyburn explicitly said this, right? And the quote he used, and I pointed this out in my article at the Daily Wire, which we'll get to, which I think is a really heinous quote, is African American women need to be rewarded for their loyalty. I would postulate to you that that kind of rhetoric is far more dehumanizing and tokenizing and offensive to the agency of Americans of color than the term DEI hire, which is not simply a stand-in for race.
Just so when we hear about candidates being chosen based on, for example, geography, you know, we need to pick somebody from the Midwest to appeal to voters from there. Again, is there daylight between something like that and what the likes of James Clyburn said?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yes, the simple answer is yes. Obviously, politics always has been, and always will be, in a sense, an optics game, right? Mm-hmm. Trump did not pick J.D. Vance because he thought he would appeal to National Review readers or those kinds of independents who might cast votes for him. He picked him very specifically to appeal to a group of voters, and Joe Biden clearly has done the same thing with Kamala Harris. Again, there is nothing inherently wrong with you pick candidates based on a whole plethora of factors, and sometimes that includes race. But the problem is, don't pretend that you didn't in hindsight. And one of the things I also point out in the article is that a lot of the criticisms of Kamala come down to this really weird dichotomy that a lot of DEI advocates employ on the regular, which is that DEI programs, this is premise one, DEI programs are good and necessary to rectify structural inequality. That's one, right? So they're good programs. But two, if you ever suggest that anybody has ever benefited from them, mm-hmm. that is racism. So you do not get to have it both ways.
Isaac, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it. Again, the piece is in the Daily Wire. I'll push out the link. Thanks again.
Thanks so much. Take care.